Why would anyone want to cry over a racist? That's the question facing many pro wrestling fans following the news of Hulk Hogan's passing at 71. The man who once embodied American heroism, who stood tall in the ring urging fans to say your prayers and eat your vitamins, has left behind not just a legacy of showmanship, but also deep controversy. Back in 2015, the wrestling world was shaken when private comments from a 2007 recording surfaced, revealing Hogan's real name Terry Bollea, using racially offensive language during a private conversation. The clip, part of a leaked tape, included statements expressing discomfort with his daughter dating a black man, as well as repeated use of a racial slur. The revelations sent shockwaves through the wrestling community. For millions who grew up idolizing him, this was the moment the illusion cracked. The childhood hero who had once inspired generations now appeared deeply flawed. The contrast between Hulk Hogan, the iconic performer, and Terry Bollea, the man behind the character, became stark, and for many fans, it was a bridge too far to cross. To be clear, Hogan's contributions to professional wrestling are monumental. He was the face of WWE's golden era in the 1980s. His charisma and star power helped bring wrestling into the mainstream. From headlining WrestleManias to appearing in pop culture moments and family-friendly films like No Holds Barred and Three Ninjas, High Noon at Mega Mountain, Hogan wasn't just a wrestler, he was a global brand. His crossover success set the stage for future megastars like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and John Cena to follow the same path from the ring to Hollywood. Hogan's influence is undeniable. But influence and legacy are not immune to scrutiny. When the controversial comments became public, Hogan appeared on ABC News in 2015 and issued a public apology. "I'm not a racist," he said. "I never should have said what I said. It was wrong. I'm embarrassed by it. But people need to understand that you inherit things from your environment." His apology, however, didn't land the way he might have hoped. Rather than taking full ownership, he seemed to attribute his behavior to the environment he grew up in, an explanation that some viewed as a deflection. At 61 years old at the time, many fans felt that he should have known better. The attempt to shift blame from personal choice to upbringing came across as evasive, especially to longtime fans who had supported him regardless of their backgrounds. The response from WWE was swift. Hogan's contract was terminated, his presence scrubbed from the company's website, and his name temporarily removed from the WWE Hall of Fame. Though he was reinstated a few years later and brought back into WWE programming, the damage to his relationship with a significant portion of the fanbase had already been done. Still, there were fans who chose to forgive. Some pointed to personal growth, while others leaned on nostalgia. To them, the Hulk Hogan character remained an important part of their wrestling memories. For those fans, the flawed apology was enough. They continued to embrace the performer, not the person. They mourned the loss of an icon, not the shortcomings of the individual beneath the bandana. This kind of separation between performer and person is not new in entertainment. Across music, film, and sports, fans have long debated where to draw the line between legacy and personal values. For some, it's easy to separate the art from the artist. For others, especially fans from marginalized communities, that separation is far more difficult. Hogan's remarks weren't just disappointing, they felt deeply personal. For fans of color, especially those who looked up to him as a childhood hero, discovering that admiration wasn't mutual was painful. Many had grown up cheering him on, believing he stood for strength, unity, and perseverance. Learning that he once held views that conflicted with those ideals felt like a betrayal. To them, Hogan's death isn't just the end of a public figure, it's the closing chapter of a legacy they had already emotionally moved on from years ago. The man who once stood as a symbol of inspiration had, in their eyes, lost that title long before his passing, which brings us back to a difficult question. How should one react to the death of a beloved but flawed public figure? It's not an accusation. It's a reflection. Yes, Hulk Hogan revolutionized professional wrestling. Yes, he entertained millions and built an empire. But does that automatically guarantee a glowing farewell? Not necessarily. Legacy without context is incomplete. Some legacies are simply too complex to be summed up in tribute videos or highlight reels. And that's okay. For many, the most honest response isn't anger or celebration, but quiet acknowledgement. An acceptance that while someone's influence may be vast, it does not exempt them from the consequences of their actions. That it's possible to recognize the impact someone had without excusing the harm they caused. That mourning can be nuanced, and in some cases, silence is not apathy, but clarity. There will be fans who choose to honor his memory. There will be those who choose not to. Both responses are valid. Mourning is not a requirement, it's a personal choice. And not every icon earns a hero's send-off. Hulk Hogan's life, and now his death, highlights the delicate balance between fame and accountability. In a world that often builds heroes in haste and deconstructs them just as fast, Hogan's story is a reminder that even the most towering figures are human, flawed, complex, and ultimately accountable. If there's any lesson to be learned here, it's this: be mindful of who you put on a pedestal. When characters become more important than character, disappointment is often inevitable. For some, Hulk Hogan will always be the face of professional wrestling, a pioneer, a legend. For others, he'll remain a reminder that legacy, like truth, is rarely black and white. The painful truth is that Hogan's racism wasn't part of a storyline. It wasn't a heel turn. It wasn't kayfabe. It was real. And real wounds don't get healed with nostalgia. For many, the issue wasn't just the words he said, but the fact that those words confirmed a suspicion that had always lingered unspoken. That Hogan's embrace was never meant for everyone. That the values he claimed to represent were performative. That the audience he spoke to, the one he urged to believe in themselves, had limits. And that if you didn't look like him, believe like him, or live like him, you weren't really part of the brotherhood. Those feelings don't disappear just because someone dies. For fans of color who grew up cheering Hulk Hogan, his death does not come wrapped in sorrow, but in unresolved tension. Because grieving someone who never respected you is not grieving at all. It's remembering. It's remembering how you felt when you first saw him rip his shirt down the middle, adrenaline pumping, the crowd roaring. It's remembering how you felt when you learned that same man used a racial slur so casually, so freely. And it's remembering the way the world responded, some defending him, others excusing him, and many simply moving on. But moving on doesn't mean forgetting, because while people can forgive, history does not forget. It records. And when someone of Hogan's stature passes away, it is not only fair, it is necessary to examine the totality of their legacy. That includes the championships, the sold-out arenas, the tearful Make-A-Wish appearances. But it also includes the private conversations, the leaked tapes, the pain caused. And if you're someone wondering why your favorite wrestling content creator, journalist, or fan isn't gushing over Hogan's life today, this is why. Because not everyone has the luxury of separating the character from the man. Some of us don't get to forget. Some of us were the targets. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a space that few public deaths truly force us into. Gray. For some, mourning Hulk Hogan is easy. They remember the good. They block out the rest. For others, mourning him feels impossible. Because to mourn is to honor. And how do you honor someone who never honored you? That is the burden Hogan leaves behind. Not just a legacy, but a mirror. One that reflects what we choose to remember, what we choose to ignore, and what we choose to forgive. His death is not the end of Hulkamania. It's the final chapter in a complicated story that still leaves questions in the air like smoke in an empty arena, and maybe that's the most honest way to say goodbye, not with cheers or boos, but with truth. The kind that doesn't always come with closure. The kind that doesn't wrap everything in red and yellow, but lets the silence speak for itself. In the days following Hulk Hogan's death, WWE quietly posted a tribute video. A familiar one. Slow-motion highlights of his biggest wins. The ear-cupping pose. The leg drops. The flexing biceps. A gravel-voiced narrator called him a larger-than-life icon. The audience? Mixed. Some fans filled the comments with crying emojis and thank you messages. Others dropped reminders. One word. Racist. And, just like that, the War of Memory began. But this wasn't new, because ever since those tapes leaked in 2015, the wrestling world has lived with a splintered reality. In one version, Hulk Hogan was the greatest of all time, bigger than life, the embodiment of charisma, a man who put wrestling on the map. In the other version, he was a fallen idol, a reminder that the people we idolize often fall short of being people we should trust. This divide didn't form overnight. It's been growing for years. Quietly at first, like a crack in glass. But when news of his death hit, that crack spiderwebbed into something much larger. A full-blown conversation about legacy, race, and the way we choose who deserves forgiveness. It's not a comfortable conversation, but it's necessary, because to understand the emotional response to Hogan's death is to understand the pain he caused, not just to individuals, but to the culture of wrestling itself. Wrestling, like any form of entertainment, has always had its blind spots. For decades, it leaned into stereotypes, played up caricatures, exploited ethnicities. Hulk Hogan was both a product and a beneficiary of that system. He didn't invent racism in wrestling, but he represented the era where it was camouflaged as patriotism, where Real American blared from the speakers and fans were told to cheer for the man in red, white, and blue, no matter what his real beliefs might be. That era is over now, but the wounds remain. Some of the most heartbreaking reactions to Hogan's death have come not from detractors, but from those who once loved him deeply. Black fans, brown fans, people who grew up idolizing him, only to be gut-punched by his words years later. For them, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was personal, because they didn't just lose a favorite wrestler, they lost a piece of their own childhood. Imagine being 10 years old, standing in your living room, doing the Hogan pose. Then imagine being 25 and hearing him say he doesn't want his daughter dating someone who looks like you. Now imagine the world telling you to get over it, to forgive him, to separate the man from the moment. Some can do that, others can't, and neither reaction is wrong. Grief is not a monolith. It is shaped by your relationship to the person, by your experiences, by the values you hold. For some, Hogan's death is a time to reflect on the good. For others, it is a moment to finally breathe. A closing of a door they already walked away from a decade ago, and in that, we begin to understand something deeper. That mourning isn't just about who died, it's about who they were to you. To some, he was a hero. To others, a disappointment. To many, both. And when someone occupies both spaces, grief becomes complicated. It becomes heavy, because it forces us to ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. Can you admire someone who hurt you? Can you grieve for someone you don't forgive? Can a legend still be a cautionary tale? WWE, for its part, has tried to walk the line. In bringing Hogan back after his 2015 exile, they signaled a willingness to forgive, or at least to move on. But their actions sent another message too. That money talks. That nostalgia sells. That for every fan who was outraged, there were 10 more willing to chant Hogan if the music hit, and in doing so, they reignited the debate about accountability versus profitability. Wrestling, unlike film or music, is built on the illusion of character. But the moment that illusion shatters, it's hard to put it back together. Hulk Hogan didn't just break the fourth wall. He bulldozed it. He forced his fans to see the man behind the mustache, and many didn't like what they saw when he stepped back into a WWE ring years later. The cheers were real, but so were the side-eyes. For some fans, every chant felt like a compromise. Still, he returned. He hosted WrestleMania again. He posed with other legends. He smiled as fans held up signs calling him the GOAT, but the silence beneath those moments said more than the applause ever could, and that silence spoke loudest on the day he died. Across social media, fans wrestled with their emotions. Some posted long tributes, detailing the impact Hogan had on their lives. Others posted black squares, or nothing at all. Some shared links to his racist comments, using his death as a teachable moment. Others accused those same people of disrespecting the dead. But let's be clear about something. Holding someone accountable in death is not the same as celebrating their downfall. It's about honesty. It's about nuance. It's about resisting the pressure to rewrite history just because a chapter has ended. Because death does not erase a past, it only ends a future, and Hulk Hogan's past is complicated. He was a pioneer, a draw, a megastar. But he was also a man who said vile, hurtful things and then struggled to truly make amends. That's not slander. That's truth. And if a legacy cannot withstand the truth, then it is not a legacy worth defending. The most mature form of mourning is not blind praise. It is acknowledgement. It is saying, he meant something to me. He did things that were great. And he did things that were wrong. I can hold both. This is what it means to live in the gray, not to cancel, not to glorify, but to confront. To look back at your own memories with clear eyes and say, this mattered to me. But now I see it differently. That kind of honesty doesn't diminish a legacy, it completes it, because the story of Hulk Hogan is not just a story of championships and catchphrases. It's also a story about America's blind spots. About the way fame protects some from consequence, and how quickly those protections crumble when reality kicks in. It's about how easily we elevate flawed men to godhood, and how slowly we bring them back to earth. Hogan's death has reignited all of this. Not because people want to destroy his memory, but because they never got a satisfying reckoning while he was alive. They got a taped apology, they got a return to the ring, but they never got the real conversation. The one where he sat down and truly owned what he said, not blamed his environment, not skirted responsibility, but looked into the camera and said, I failed you. I failed who I said I was. That moment never came. And now it never will. So what do we do with that? We reflect. We listen. We allow space for multiple truths to exist at once, and we ask the hard question again, not to provoke, but to understand. Why would anyone want to cry over a racist? Maybe the answer is they don't. Maybe the answer is they're crying over what he meant, not who he was. Or maybe they're not crying at all. Maybe they're just remembering, and that might be enough, because some icons are in our mourning. Others teach us what happens when we mistake charisma for character, when we idolize men instead of values, when we build statues on sand and are surprised when they sink. Hulk Hogan will be remembered. That much is certain. But how he is remembered, that is no longer up to him. It's up to us, and in that, we hold power not just to mourn, but to learn. To decide what kind of heroes we choose to lift up next. To be more careful with our praise. More honest with our reflection. More aware of the legacy we shape when we choose to forget inconvenient truths, because Hogan didn't just leave behind a memory. He left behind a challenge. Will we be better next time? Will we demand more of our heroes? Or will we just pick another mask, another mustache, another song to chant to? That choice, that reckoning belongs to the fans now, not the character, not the company, not the man.us. In professional wrestling, few things are ever final. Retirements are reversed. Feuds rekindled. Legends return again and again, even after the spotlight fades. But death? That's different. Death is the one angle that doesn't get rewritten. And now, with Hulk Hogan gone, the wrestling world must confront something far more difficult than a heel turn or a shocking promo. It must confront what remains after the curtain truly falls. The reaction from fans, insiders, and media outlets hasn't followed the typical playbook. There was no universal mourning, no undivided tribute, no consensus. Instead, there was fragmentation. Online spaces quickly became battlegrounds of emotion. Instagram comments under WWE's post filled with praise were immediately met with screenshots of Hogan's racial slurs. Twitter threads spiraled into debates, not over his in-ring achievements, but over whether those achievements should matter at all, and in that chaos, something raw and revealing emerged, a fanbase no longer willing to stay silent about what hurts them. A fanbase that refuses to ignore the truth just because the person who spoke it has died. For years, wrestling fans, especially fans of color, have watched their heroes fall short. They've forgiven gimmicks rooted in stereotypes. They've endured characters that mocked their culture. They've been told to cheer anyway, to buy the t-shirt, to get over it, But Hogan's death, in many ways, feels like a turning point. Because for the first time, silence isn't being accepted as reverence. It's being questioned. And that's not divisive. That's progress. The modern wrestling audience is more diverse, more vocal, and more aware than ever before. They don't just watch the matches, they follow the news, read the lawsuits, analyze the backstage politics. They understand that wrestling is performance, yes, but it is also culture. And culture, when stained by racism, demands to be examined. So when fans say they can't mourn Hogan the way others do, they're not being disrespectful. They're being honest. They're saying, I remember what he said. I remember how it made me feel. And I can't pretend that didn't happen just because he's gone. That honesty has clashed with another truth, nostalgia, because for a whole generation of wrestling fans, mostly white, mostly older, Hulk Hogan was everything. He was the Saturday night hero. The one who beat the giant, who never gave up, who represented the good guys. To them, his death is a personal loss. A reminder of their youth. A symbol of simpler times, now gone forever. They don't want to hear about the tapes. About the slurs. About the hurt, and that resistance creates tension. Between those who want to remember the man who saved wrestling, and those who can't forget the man who betrayed them. But it's not about sides. It's about stories. And which ones we choose to tell. The story WWE wants to tell is clear. It's the story of an icon. A pioneer. The man who built WrestleMania with his bare hands and larger-than-life persona. That story is not false. But it's not complete. Because the same man who tore his shirt off in front of 93,000 fans at the Pontiac Silverdome is the same man who, behind closed doors, used racial slurs to describe the very people who once cheered him. And if we're not willing to tell both stories, then we're not telling the truth. That's why this moment matters. Because legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn. And when that legacy becomes fractured, when it becomes complicated, it doesn't mean you erase it. It means you tell it honestly. Even if that honesty makes people uncomfortable. Even if it means you lose subscribers. Even if it means you have to look back at your childhood hero and say, he wasn't who I thought he was. That's painful, but it's necessary, because wrestling has always been about illusion. Faces and heels, worked shoots and promos, reality blurred with fiction. But this is real. This is about who we choose to mourn, who we choose to honor, and whether we're mature enough, honest enough, and brave enough to do both at once. There's also a question lingering beneath all of this. One WWE and other entertainment companies often try to avoid. What does redemption actually look like? When Hulk Hogan was brought back to WWE, it was marketed as redemption. A man who had done wrong, said he was sorry, and returned to reclaim his legacy. But redemption without reflection is just reputation management. Did Hogan ever truly grapple with what he said? Did he meet with the communities he hurt? Did he ever publicly confront the pain he caused, not just to his fans, but to the culture he helped shape? Or did he simply lie low until the outrage faded? Because there's a difference between time served and lessons learned. And while some fans were willing to forgive, others were watching closely, waiting for that moment of realness. That confession. That confrontation. It never came. Instead, they got a carefully worded apology and a slow return to the spotlight. They got smiles and handshakes and quiet reintroductions. But they never got the truth, and now they never will. That void is part of the grief. The grief not of losing a legend, but of losing the chance for something real. Something that could have healed. Something that could have taught future generations of wrestlers that being an icon doesn't mean being immune to accountability. Instead, we got the same old playbook. Ignore the bad, highlight the good, and hope people forget. But this generation doesn't forget. They repost. They screenshot. They amplify, and in doing so, they're reclaiming the narrative. They're saying, this is what happened. This is what hurt. And no amount of nostalgia is going to erase that. It's not an attack. It's a truth. And if wrestling is to evolve, if it's to survive in an era where fans are more conscious than ever, then it must learn to live with that truth. Hold it up next to the legacy, and accept that both can exist. That a man can revolutionize an industry and still fail the people who made that industry possible. That a performer can be great at what he did and still be wrong for what he said. That mourning is not permission, and tribute is not absolution. For those still wondering how to feel, the answer is, however you need to. If you want to honor Hulk Hogan for the memories, that's your right. If you want to mourn in silence, that's valid. If you want to remember his racism before you remember his title runs, you are not wrong. Because grief is not a one-size-fits-all performance. It's personal. It's complex. It's real, and in a world where we often celebrate celebrities without ever truly knowing them, Hogan's death is a reminder that our heroes are never just what we see on TV. They're people. With flaws. With pasts. With legacies that don't always match their legends. And maybe that's the most important takeaway of all, that instead of building pedestals so high our heroes can't breathe, we should start building spaces where truth is welcome, even when it's uncomfortable. Where accountability doesn't come only after death, where legacy includes context, and where the fans, the people who made these icons matter in the first place, are finally the ones writing the final chapter. By the time the tribute reels have stopped playing, by the time WWE has moved on to its next pay-per-view, and by the time the final trending hashtags fade into the digital ether, the story of Hulk Hogan's death will remain, not just as a news headline, but as a moment etched into the evolving conscience of wrestling culture, not because he died, but because of what his death revealed. It exposed a deep fracture in how we, as a community of fans, interpret legacy. It laid bare the dissonance between nostalgia and truth. It forced people who once stood shoulder to shoulder, chanting Hogan, Hogan, to ask one another quietly, even painfully, what exactly are we mourning? Some mourn the icon. The titan of Titan sports. The man who slammed Andre the Giant and, in doing so, symbolically lifted an entire company onto his shoulders. Others mourn the illusion. The fantasy that the hero you loved as a kid might actually have seen you, valued you. But many mourn nothing at all. Because the grief expired in 2015, the moment they heard those tapes, and if we're honest, the shadow of those words, the ones Hogan tried to bury under time, PR statements, and legacy appearances, will never really leave, because racism, when revealed, isn't just a moment. It's a rupture. It rearranges how people feel about you, how they interpret every match, every promo, every gesture that once made them feel seen. For fans of color, the damage is generational. It's the memory of idolizing someone who didn't see them as equal. It's the emotional labor of having to explain again and again why those words matter, why they still hurt, why this isn't about being too sensitive, why it's not just wrestling. And now, with Hogan gone, they've been robbed of something else, closure, because redemption doesn't happen posthumously. Not really. You don't get to fix what you broke after you're gone. You don't get to rewrite the pain in people's hearts with eulogies. You don't get to reclaim the love you lost after it's too late to say, I understand now. For Hulk Hogan, that opportunity was there. For years, and he didn't take it. Instead, he gave the world a version of accountability that felt manufactured. Hollow. Incomplete. He apologized for the tape being leaked, more than for the views that the tape revealed. He blamed the culture of his upbringing, never quite owning the adult choices he made in private. He never sat down with black wrestlers publicly, never acknowledged the very real trauma his words caused fans, never built a bridge back to the people who needed to see it most, and now the bridge is gone. So what do we do with the pieces? We examine them. We learn from them. We teach the next generation that being a legend isn't about how many belts you won. It's about how you treat people when the cameras aren't rolling. It's about the impact you leave off the mic, as much as on it. And that charisma without character is just noise. We also talk about the others. The wrestlers who were overlooked, who were pushed aside in favor of Hogan's shine. The black talent who were never allowed to rise because there was only room for one icon. The ones who never said the wrong thing, but also never got the spotlight. We center their stories now, because wrestling doesn't have to repeat the same patterns. It doesn't have to wait until someone dies to reevaluate the truth. It doesn't have to sanitize its past. It can face it, and in doing so, it can grow. Already, there are signs that change is coming. Wrestlers like Kofi Kingston, Bobby Lashley, and Bianca Belair have not only reached the top, they've been embraced by fans from all backgrounds. But the industry must go further. It must ensure that the next Hulk Hogan isn't just a draw, but a man whose values match his volume. A man whose legacy won't have an asterisk, because Hogan's story, like so many in American entertainment, is a warning. A warning about elevating charisma over conscience, about idolizing people before we know who they really are, about giving second chances without requiring accountability first. It's a reminder that being the face of a generation doesn't make you immune to criticism. It makes you responsible for the generation that followed, and that's where the conversation turns to us, the fans, the creators, the community, because we get to choose what we carry forward. We can keep reposting the highlight reels, or we can talk honestly about the full picture. We can keep whispering about race in wrestling, or we can drag it into the spotlight where it belongs. We can keep waiting for the industry to do better, or we can demand it. We don't owe our silence to the past. We owe our truth to the future, and the truth is, Hulk Hogan was a defining figure in wrestling, but he was also a defining figure in its